Well, I did it. I completed my last class at Booth, and I thought I would take the opportunity to talk about my experience of the Chicago Booth Business School, particularly the part-time program. Before we get to the content, please be sure to like this video. Subscribe so you can get more content in oil and gas and professional development topics. And please be sure to comment on the video below so I can incorporate your feedback into future videos. Please be sure to hit the notification bell when you do subscribe, because I upload whenever I want. Now, let's get to the content. This is going to be another stream of consciousness because I think speaking from the heart might be the best way to convey all my thoughts, and I don't know how organized this manner is going to be, but we'll go from here. How do I start my experience with Booth? I'll work backwards. I think the first thing that comes into my mind is the logistics of asking the question, Yoshi, how did you go from Midland to Chicago every week, 10 weeks at a time, for 2 years straight? Let me go in more into detail with the logistics. The travel took a toll on me, let's just put it that way, because I had to take connecting flights. I'm not just flying from Midland to Houston or Midland to Denver, it's Midland to Houston to Chicago, and there's no direct flight from Midland to Chicago, and I don't know when that's ever going to happen. But anyway, the traveling on average took about, from door to door, 7 to 8 hours, and that is assuming that there's no delays in my travels. Yeah. And imagine doing that every week. That's like 1/5 of a full-time job. And some of you guys who live in big cities probably spend 10 hours a week in a car. So imagine doing that on top of the door-to-door traveling. But no, I don't deal with the big traffic that you do in big cities. But anyway, logistics has been a nightmare, and I've come to the point where I do not sympathize with people when people are complaining about flight delays, because I have encountered all the flight delay nightmares. I've had flights cancel on me. I've had consistent delays until flights cancel on me. I've had flight delays where I'd miss my connection. I've had multiple days being stuck in a city. I've had to experience Mother's Day at an airport with my mom and having consistent flight delays until an eventual cancellation. I can go on, but you can imagine the flight nightmares that I've gone through with just going to Booth. Now, there is some reprieve behind all of this. In other words, I didn't spend every single quarter in person. There were some remote classes that were offered throughout the quarters. So the way I strategized this is that I would have the summer and the winter quarters I would spend remotely. And then the spring and the summer quarters, spring and the fall quarters, where the seasons are a lot milder, I would fly to Chicago 10 weeks at a time. So therefore, I didn't have to deal with consistent traveling throughout the year. Although my first year at Booth, I did spend 9 months traveling every week to Chicago. So that was before I realized some of the remote classes were being offered, and that's how I made that decision. So I managed to make this program a hybrid program where I'd spend half the quarters remote and then a little more than half the quarters in person. However, Chicago Booth does take pride in having the in-person courses for the networking experience. And I think this segues really well to how much networking did you actually get out of the program? And the answer is not as much as the full-time students, or not as much as the evening students. And that's the truth. Because I was coming in and out every single week to Chicago. I would spend my Friday nights in Chicago. I would land pretty late, and if with the flight delays, I would land later than I would expect. And then I would fly out Saturday night because I would spend the entire day doing classes on Saturday. So then I would take the 6 p.m. flight to Houston. And then more recently, in my most recent quarters, I spent the nights with my parents in Houston, and then I would take a Sunday morning flight back to Midland. But earlier in my booth journey, when there was a 9 p.m. flight to go to Midland, a 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. flight to go to Midland, I would take that flight. But that was not the case. Like, United stopped having those flights afterwards. So therefore, needless to say, the networking wasn't something that I took full advantage of. But the way that I did experience the networking was mostly, and you can hear the cat in the background meowing. But what I did experience the most through networking or through my study group classes, or through the study group and through the lead cohort. Booth does a good job in introducing you to your cohort, and you can create as many Slack groups as possible and keep in touch with people. But the key message here is that you have to go out of your way to make the networking happen. There are a bajillion student groups that Booth has, and you can take advantage of going to those Booth group events. And I've gone to a couple of them for sure, and I've definitely met a lot of people. But I will say that I didn't make a habit out of going to each and every single one of them, because at the end of the day, I was in and out. And every single day I spent in Chicago, I'm also spending an extra night in a hotel. So the cost can incur quite a bit if you do the economics. Now, I'm not trying to rant and create a long list of disappointments throughout the program, and I don't think I am, just based on my experiences. I'm just giving you the real deal over here in terms of how my experience at Booth went through the past 2 and a little over 2 years. To give you some background, I started the program in April 2022, and I ended the program in June of 2024. And I know at this time of the recording, it is it's May 19th, I would say. But I'm graduating in a couple weeks. What's left between me and graduation are final exams. So I'll be studying really hard for those final exams, and I just can't wait to walk the stage. But anyway, that is some background of how I started the program. So that's after COVID. That's when all the in-person classes started, and that's where people can really experience just the Booth community and everything that Chicago Booth has to offer. So that's a little bit of my networking experience. The key takeaway from this is that there are plenty of networking opportunities through the student groups. It's not necessarily held by the department itself, but they're held by student groups, and you have to go out of your way in order to make those student groups happen, or the networking in the community feel happen. As far as community felt, there is a community in terms of in terms of academics, but I didn't feel a sense of community along with my cohort because of the flexible schedules. So to give you some background on that, Booth does provide a flexible schedule in the sense that there are some required classes you have to take, there's some required functional discipline classes you have to take, and then half of your classes are electives. I actually like this plan because you can tailor the program to whatever you want to get out of it or to your needs. So that is a plus. The delta, I would say, here is that you don't necessarily get a sense of community within your cohort. So if that is something that you're looking forward to, then maybe this might not be the program for you. Now let me talk about the academics. The academic rigor is real at Booth. It lived up to my standards and more. And that was the primary reason as to why I wanted to join Booth, because I knew I would get the academic rigor, the traditional MBA experience, the business acumen, knowing what questions to ask from the classes that I have taken, and the classes are just insane. What's even more insane are your student groups, because everybody is smart. Everybody got a 700 plus on their GMAT. Everybody made above a 3.5 in school in their GPA and above in their undergrad or graduate school. You are dealing with the cream of the crop in terms of people who have a fire under their belly and want to do as many things as possible in the program. Now, Academics is also hit or miss, because a lot of people say that the full-time students have a lot more optionality of what kinds of classes that they can take, whereas the weekend students do not have much optionality, because at the end of the day you take your classes Friday night, Thursday night, or all of Saturday, depending on how your schedule allows it. So I didn't necessarily thought that was a delta for me. I thought there were some really good classes that I was able to take over the weekends. And I still got the academic rigor, and I still got the needed classes out of the program. So as far as academics go, it lived up to my expectations and more, and that was something that I was really satisfied with at Booth. Other things that I want to talk about, not necessarily subject related, are hit or misses in terms of professors. There are going to be some really academic professors that never really worked in industry, and then there's some that have worked in industry and that get it in terms of how much workload they should give to students. The kind of workload that you're going to expect in terms of academics is at least 5 hours a week, at least. A little bit more than that is and the most that I've experienced was 20 hours a week. And that was probably one of the biggest mistakes. That was probably the only class I ever took, and that was probably the biggest mistake I've ever had. So that was my one regret at Booth. And in any course that says advanced in front of it, that is like, unless you have a background in it and you're really good at the material, then take an advanced course. As far as friends go at Booth, I did make plenty of friends. As far as close friends go, I can narrow it down to like 1 or 2 people that I would say are close friends for me. And that is based on the number of classes I've taken with those people and the experiences that we were able to share, and the fact that they could relate to a lot of the experiences that I was having at Booth. You may be asking the question that with a strenuous schedule of flying from Midland to Chicago and going through the academic program and the rigor at Booth, did you ever wanted to quit? And the answer is yeah. There were days I wanted to quit. There were days I was stuck in an airport and I realized, why in the world am I doing this? I'm spending more time in an airport than I am doing my classwork. There is more time I'm spending traveling, just getting the logistics right, than actually experiencing the material. And sometimes things got so hard that I just wanted to give up, and it was also taking a toll on my body. If you look at the video that I gave in terms of my halfway point at Booth, I gained about 20 pounds my first year because of all the traveling and all just the imbalances that I was having, just having to adjust to. And at the time I had a new job, and it was a very stressful job too, and then a stressful program. I mean, a new job has its own stresses and as well. And to also give you some background on this, that wasn't the only job change I made throughout the program. I made 2 job changes throughout the program. So yeah, there were many times I wanted to quit the program, but the one thing that I always remembered was my why. Like, why did I want to start to begin with? And I can tell you that why. For 7 years, I knew that I wanted to do the Chicago Booth MBA program. The minute I graduated with my undergrad with a petroleum engineering degree, I said, once I have enough work experience, or I feel like I have enough work experience, and I think that now is the time, then I'm going to pursue it. So right after my master's degree at Texas A&M University in petroleum engineering, I took a year off in terms of school, like no schooling for me along with work. I was still doing a full-time job at work. But I started going through the Chicago Booth application process, and I received the fortunate news that I got into the program. And the reason why I wanted to do the program, I've already sprinkled some of those reasons throughout in this video, but to clarify why I started the program, or why I wanted to pursue the program, is I wanted a traditional MBA, I wanted the business acumen, I wanted to know what questions to ask in a business context. I also wanted to expand my mindset to not just to the oil and gas industry, but also to other industries as well, which I got that exposure to. And I didn't want to silo myself into the oil and gas industry. I wanted a degree that was agnostic to that. Because even if I am very committed to the oil and gas industry and I'm very, very supportive of the oil and gas industry, you never know where your future is going to take you. And I wanted a degree to make sure that it was agnostic to the oil and gas industry. And it's also beneficial to the oil and gas industry because you can bring fresh perspectives to your experience at your full-time job. So that is one thing that I did. Another thing that I did was the practical applications that I had from the Booth program. For example, lots of classes that I have taken, I was able to apply into my full-time job. I was able to ask those business questions. I was able to know what kind of financial models that were being used in financial forecasting, for example. So I will say that Booth does live up to its reputation when it comes to quantitative courses, when it comes to practical application, and when it comes to the business acumen that you are going to obtain. But like any program, the main question you're probably going to ask yourself is, what are you going to make? How you're going to use the degree? And I think I got what I needed out of the program to how I'm going to use the degree. I've been asked this question twice, and I'll ask this question for the sake of the video. Yoshi, would you do it over again? And my answer to that question is, I would do it over again if I lived in a bigger city. Because the travel was the thing that really took a toll on me in terms of mental stress and even making time to do my homework. It was a full-time load just by doing that. So I was basically doing 2 full-time jobs, in other words. It felt like it, at least. And I can't imagine how people do this with children. I really can't. Like, I don't know how people do it with kids. On the flip side, they also live in Chicago. Some of the ones that do have children also live in Chicago. So, a piece of advice that I got throughout the program is that just don't have children during the program. So, if for what it's worth, for those of you that are planning to have children and that are also pursuing an MBA, you may want to take that piece of advice as well, as far as having kids. But it can be done. It definitely can be done. And that's another takeaway. Probably the final takeaway. I'll mention this because I'm already running at 17, 18 minutes of this video. One thing that I will say is that the program was worth it. Even though it took a toll on me, even though there were times I've wanted to quit, even though it did take a toll on my body, which I was able to get back into it. I'm in a healthier state right now. I've lost that weight. I've lost those 20 pounds, actually. It was definitely worth it. I think if I were to do it over again, I would. I would just live in a bigger city to make that happen. Well, folks, let me know what other questions you may have in terms of the Booth part-time program, especially as a weekend student. It's definitely a trek just to make it to Chicago. It's definitely a trek just to go through the academic rigor that the program provides. But at the end of the day, you just got to know what you want to get out of the program, whether if you want to pivot or whether if you don't. It's completely up to you. This is coming from an experience who didn't want to pivot away from the oil and gas industry, but has made her job change. And part of the job change that I did make was really catered to my MBA, was catered to the MBA questions that I had and the experience that I was going to apply on the job. So I definitely got what I wanted out of the program. As usual, please be sure to like this video, subscribe so you can get more content in oil and gas and professional development topics. And please be sure to comment on the video below so I can incorporate your feedback into future videos. This is Yoshi Pradhan, the final review for the Chicago Booth MBA program part time. Signing off.